Welcome to the 2020 Indiana Black Expo Minority Small Business Series presented by KeyBank. Today's topic is moving beyond diversity to racial equity in the workplace. Indiana Black Expo is celebrating 50 years as an organization. For 50 years, IBE has provided technical support, resources, training, and procurement opportunities for small and minority businesses to help them build capacity. This work would not be possible without the support of our generous sponsors. Please help me thank our presenting sponsor, KeyBank, for their sponsorship and community support to small businesses. Also, we would like to thank AT&T, Carrier, Cummins, Delta Faucet, the Indianapolis Airport Authority, OneAmerica, Visit Indy, and Indianapolis Power and Light. We'd also like to thank our conference partners, the Indianapolis Recorder, the Indiana Department of Workforce Development, Indy Chamber, Engaging Solutions, the City of Indianapolis, Indiana Department of Administration, and the State of Indiana. Before we start, I have a few housekeeping rules for you. First, if you have a question, please type it in the Q&A box, and we will answer as many as possible before our session ends. Also, toward the end of the session, there will be a link to the session survey in the chat box. We ask that you fill out the survey to assist us with planning future webinars. At this time, I would like to introduce today's host, Ms. Camille Blunt, Director of the Office of Minority and Women Business Development for the City of Indianapolis.
Thank you, Alice, and welcome again to today's session, Moving Beyond Diversity to Racial Equity in the Workplace. Mayor Joe Hogsett is the 49th mayor of the City of Indianapolis. During his time in office, Mayor Hogsett has lifted the city's 35-year moratorium on new streetlights, launched a comprehensive criminal justice reform effort, and invested millions in grassroots violence reduction efforts. With the unanimous support of the City County Council, Mayor Hogsett has laid out an infrastructure plan that will spend more than $400 million on roads, streets, and sidewalks over the next 4 years, making much needed investments in Indianapolis neighborhoods. Mayor Hogsett is committed to creating a city where prosperity and opportunity are attainable for all. In 2016, he launched Project Indy, a program that has positively impacted over 6,000 young adults in Marion County by engaging them in the workforce. In 2018, Mayor Hogsett and city leaders created Indy Achieves, an education program aimed at increasing the number of Marion County residents qualified for jobs of the 21st century. In this keynote address, Mayor Hogsett will speak about the city's commitment to supplier diversity and opportunities for small minority and women-owned businesses.
Well, thank you, Camille. And I want to take this opportunity to thank Tanya McKenzie and all at Indiana Black Expo for keeping this event on our schedules as we celebrate 50 years of IBE. I should note that amidst all of the significant anniversaries and events occurring this year, this is also a once-in-a-decade opportunity to make sure our city receives all of the funding and the representation that it is due. So please, remind everyone in your contacts to fill out the 2020 census if they haven't already. In many ways, it can impact the things that we discuss here today. Last year at this event, I outlined the City of Indianapolis's Disparity Study. This was the first accounting in 25 years of our utilization of XBE businesses in city contracts. The results of that study were finalized this past January. It was clear we had a lot to do. To provide the most strategic approach we gathered a diverse working group, including representatives from the mayor's cabinet, city agency directors, municipal corporations, and city council representatives. The group's area of focus included the XBE utilization plan, the purchasing manual, and city code. Armed with the results of this study and a diverse group of civic minds, the working group has provided their recommendations, which I would like to share with all of you now. I will note here that following council approval, as well as the Equal Opportunity Board approval, the following changes will be implemented immediately. The changes fall into several key areas. The first, contractor accountability. The city must require greater accountability on prime contract bidders in order to secure more XBE subcontract participation. And if goals for XBE participation are not met, we need to see documentation that good faith efforts have been made. XBE subcontractor commitments will be an explicit part of city contracts. Furthermore, any substitution of an XBE must undergo agency and OMWBD review. Second, if the city demands greater accountability of its contractors, it must demonstrate greater accountability among its own agencies. A consistent protocol across all agencies must be implemented for bid and post-bid procedures involving OMWBD. To that end, each agency will create an annual XBE inclusion plan so that the city can be sure it is continually improving XBE utilization. Third, we must specifically define our goals based on the findings in our disparity study, which take into account XBE business availability and measure the disparities XBE businesses face locally. Our annual XBE inclusion goals among all contracts are currently as follows. Minority-owned businesses at 15%. Women-owned businesses at 8%. Veteran-owned businesses at 3%. And disabled-owned businesses at 1%. Fourth, we must take active steps to promote greater XBE participation within our city. That means incentives for contractors who surpass XBE subcontract goals. But perhaps most importantly, that means increasing total XBE capacity through continued outreach and development work, and through new tools like mentor protege relationships and joint venture agreements. Fifth, while we continue to emphasize the role of more XBEs in subcontracting, those capacity building tools will allow us to grow our local XBE businesses so they can compete for larger prime contracts as well. And finally, updates to the municipal code should be made to officially include veteran-owned and disability-owned businesses in the program. To create a robust enforcement and a mechanism for enforcement, giving legal force to the policies in the utilization plan. And finally, requiring a new disparity study every 5 years. And in light of this expanded role, the Office of Minority and Women Business Development is going to hire a compliance officer. This new position will provide oversight of existing contracts and will be vital to the new enforcement mechanism being codified by city ordinance. I want to take time and personally thank Camille Blunt and the Office of Minority and Women Business Development, as well as all of those who participated in the XBE Utilization Working Group. Their work was detailed, it was exhaustive, and it was surely significant. But I will note that underneath all the details and the benchmarks and the goals is one message, and that is this: the city must change. Sometimes that change will be dramatic and headline grabbing. Other changes, like many of those I have just mentioned, will be more nuanced. Overall, though, it will translate into a broader change for a more equitable business climate in our city. Because I believe that ultimately, through the city's focused effort to promote more minority-owned businesses in city contracts, we can help move the needle and move the needle more broadly in Indianapolis, thereby allowing business to be more intentional in diversifying boardrooms, C-suites, and partnerships. And in this way, through a more equitable business climate, we can see, we will see, and we must see a more equitable experience of success for all of Indianapolis, for businesses throughout our city, a more equitable experience of success. This is the change that is long overdue. I thank you all for being with us today, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mayor. Next, we have a panel of senior executives to share with you the steps their companies are taking to create a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce. The panel will be moderated by Angela Smith-Jones, Deputy Mayor of Economic Development for the City of Indianapolis. Angela Smith-Jones was sworn in as Deputy Mayor for Economic Development in 2016. Under her purview, she oversees Develop Indy, the city's economic development organization, and Employ Indy, the city's workforce improvement board. Ladies and gentlemen, Deputy Mayor Angela Smith-Jones.
Good morning. Thank you, Camille, for that kind introduction. And thank you, Indiana Black Expo, for having me to be the moderator for this panel. I'm excited to hear what our experts have to say. And at this time, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce briefly each one of our panelists. First, we have Mr. Mario Rodriguez. He is a nationally recognized leader in aviation and the executive director of the Indianapolis Airport Authority, representing the award-winning 6 or 7 times, because Mario does a phenomenal job of award-winning Indianapolis International Airport. So a round of applause. Next, we have Ms. Lisa Gutierrez. Lisa Gutierrez is currently serving at Indiana University Health as Vice President, and Chief Diversity Officer and Inclusion Officer. Welcome, Lisa. We have Karin Sarratt. Karin serves as the Executive Vice President for OneAmerica, leading community affairs, enterprise marketing and communications, human resources, and enterprise strategy. So Karin's kind of bored on a day-to-day basis. That's a big hat. And lastly, we have Ms. Pam Hoppel. Pam joined Delta Faucet Company as Vice President of Retail in January of 2020. And as Vice President of Retail, Pam is responsible for leading and managing DFC Retail P&L. So thank you all for joining us. I'm excited to get into this robust discussion. We actually may even have a couple of more minutes to make it a little more robust, which is good because some of the questions are very interesting and you all will have lots to say. So I'd kind of like to start off the panel allowing the audience to get to know you all just a little bit better. So if each of you, and I'll kind of tell you which one to go because otherwise it'll just be like hodgepodge insanity. So, but if each of you could just tell our audience a little bit about your background and what you find yourself relying upon in your current role as you address your corporate culture and initiatives. So we'll start with Mario Rodriguez because he is on my left, and then Pam, you will be up next. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Angela, for the kind words, and it's really an honor to be here with all of you. You know, to me, equity has a bigger, broader meaning than just the theoretical sort of definition of equity. I understand it both from a technical side, but I also understand it from a personal side. You know, I came from very humble beginnings. My parents were refugees that came to this country from another country through no fault of their own. My first language was Spanish, and it's been, like with many of you, it's been a struggle. It's been a different struggle, but it's been a struggle. Each of us has our own story to get to the point that we are right now. It's been a little bit more difficult, a little bit harder. It's made us who we are, and it's created this wonderful tacit knowledge and this wonderful connectivity with the term equity, not just as a theoretical sort of equity. It's really heartfelt. And the organization, our organization, is focused 110% on making sure to do the right thing. And the right thing is to be equitable. Obviously, equity brings a lot of things. Diversity right now, today, is a business necessity, and everybody would agree. But equity is completely the right thing to do. So as the leader of the organization, that's one of my biggest focuses, not just from a technical sort of definition, but it's heartfelt. So with that.
Thank you, Mario.
Right, it's hard to not applaud, isn't it?
I know.
I know. So that was such a great introduction. I feel very similarly. You know, they're personally just doing the right thing, speaking up and doing the right thing clearly. For me, it's mostly as a mother. You know, I too came from very humble beginnings, but you know, I have a 16-year-old daughter, and as she progresses and grows, I feel it's my personal responsibility to lead by example and to really teach her about how to be a kind, contributing person. So that's kind of the personal side. The professional side is it's just good for business. You know, when you have diverse opinions, you actually have such a greater opportunity to get to a more innovative and creative answer. And analytics really support that. If you look at individual companies that have diverse populations, and not only that, but populations that represent their customers and their consumers, all of us, then all of a sudden you're more effective and more efficient. So certainly, first and foremost, for me, it's just the right thing to do. And then secondly, professionally, it makes sense. So it becomes a non-brainer.
I forgot to unmute. Okay, Karin, would you please share with us some of your personal drive for going forward?
Sure, thank you. We'll probably have that mute button challenge all day, so no worries. I think that's the new normal. For me, like others, my beginnings were, I'd say, not a straight path, so to speak. My parents divorced when I was young, and some of those challenges that emerge in terms of kids coming from homes that aren't two-parent households, the stories that you start to tell yourself and the stories that others create for you, those are early hurdles to overcome. And I'm grateful that I had a really strong, supportive mom. Like many households, she just set a wonderful example for me in terms of drive and determination. Now, the older I got, my mom and I were so much alike, I thought I might better find another path to travel. So I went to live with my dad. I thought they both could suffer equally. So I had my high school years with my dad. And my dad worked in business, my mom worked in manufacturing. So I had the pleasure of really seeing diverse experiences even growing up as a child. My mom's experience in manufacturing were 9 to 5, or she rotated shifts for her entire 30 some odd year career. And my dad's career, he worked in sales, and, life seemed really good for him in terms of, a lot of business meals. I learned to play golf with my dad, and he had a lot of entertaining stuff that he had to do. So that really afforded me the pleasure really of seeing, if you will, both worlds. This manufacturing world that was, my mom did not have a college degree. She and my dad, she worked to put him through school. And once he got through school, they divorced. So her day never came, so to speak. So I got to see both sides of what success looked like, but achieved differently. And what I'm describing is really that it's a diversity of experiences, probably across all of our careers and our personal lives. And from a professional perspective, my family and I have moved about 11 times. And those have all been different opportunities. With one organization, it was for 14 years. So we didn't move every year with the same company, but that diversity of experiences, working for different companies. I've worked in the public sector in Greenville, South Carolina. I've worked in private sector. I've worked in publicly traded companies that are all global. So again, this notion of having a diverse experience set, I think it also helps to inform all of our thinking around what people are referring today as conscious inclusion. You're going to make a conscious decision to be inclusive. And I think the more that we can all expand our background and experiences, it enables us to be in a better position to do that.
Thank you, Karin. I appreciate that insight about your personal journey. Lisa, will you please share?
Well, first of all, I'm so honored to be on the same panel because I always learn from everybody else. So just realized that I have a lot in common with everybody in the panel. And for those of you that are watching and listening, we've just met. So it's been exciting. My name is Lisa Gutierrez. I am the Vice President and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at IU Health. My passion, honestly, is connecting the dots between amazing people, their brains, their backgrounds, and solving complex problems. And I've now done it. This is my 7th grade organization. This is my 9th industry. Similar to Karin, this is my 10th relocation. So I've moved around to do this. It really stemmed a lot, and similar to Mario, I grew up in a very humble community, a community of 500 people in New Mexico. My dad was a farmer as well as a technician, but they worked in the Los Alamos National Lab, which had scientists from all around the world. And I grew up with a farmer dad who would invite these scientists home for dinner, and we would have these amazing conversations about the world. So I started out my career at Procter & Gamble, and now I'm here at IU Health, and I had a chance to kind of innovate some diversity and inclusion strategies in different countries. I had a chance to do this in 60 countries in my last organization, and the passion and some of the similarities and commonalities you find are just really, how do you leverage what you know in your cultural background, and how do you use those superpowers, quite frankly, in your day job? And that's been my kind of excitement. So one of the questions you asked, Angela, was really, what do you rely on? And ironically enough, I rely more on my business background and more on that kind of focus of thinking about the rhythm of a business, the rhythm of an organization. How do people get their work done And how can you integrate and intersect diversity and inclusion into that to make it natural and sustainable? So when I was at Cummins, that's why I love seeing that Cummins is still involved in IBE. A lot of that was around a Six Sigma rhythm. It was an engineering rhythm. So how do you do that? At IU Health, what excites me is the purpose of our 35,000 team members delivering care to the citizens of Indiana, and to know that, you know, if we can facilitate a better and a more efficient and effective way of leveraging people's superpowers to do that, ooh, that just makes me wake up every morning excited. So I'm excited to be here and appreciate this opportunity.
I love that superpower concept.
I do too. That's what I was like. Yes.
We all have it. We all have it, you know, so it's how do you find it?
We do, and everybody's superpower is different, just like every superhero, and it's up to us in leadership to identify that and elevate people and get them in the place to really maximize who they are, and it actually impacts all of our organizations in a fantastic way. So I'm so glad you said that, Lisa. Thank you. Okay, so thank you all for sharing some really good insight into who you are and what makes you the leader that you are today. I want to dive a little deeper into some of the questions and issues that have been presented. I'm going to try and remember to check the Q&A, but I also have a couple of questions kind of already prepared. So, of course, we all are very well aware, sadly, about the death in the video of Mr. George Floyd and the peaceful protests that have ensued. And it's really pretty much sparked, that has been a key spark for the racial situation in our country, the racial tensions in our country and the dialogue. And so now more people got insight into what life is like for a Black person, especially a Black male in the United States of America. So in looking in the past several months, how has this context informed, changed, accelerated how you do your diversity and inclusion efforts and strategies at each of your companies? So I'll go backwards this time. I'll let Lisa speak first, and then Karin will be next.
Thank you. So I always tell everybody that you shouldn't wait for a tragedy. You shouldn't wait for a tragedy to cause you to do your strategies in the correct way. So at IU Health, if you go back to 2016, that was, you know, then when we were dealing with some of the similar racial and civil unrest. Prior to that was 2014. Prior to that was Ferguson, I think, in either 2014 or 2012. So I always tell people is don't wait for a tragedy. When you do have a catalyst, though, leverage that catalyst to improve for all. So in 2016, prior to when I got to IU Health, our then president, he's our CEO now, Dennis Murphy, and his team had really identified some commitments to our team members and to the community on what we were going to do then. So how it accelerated, I had actually been working on representation strategies already. My CHRO is Liz Dunlap, and I had just met with Dennis Murphy early on in May. And what this did was we had put together actually some modeling on how we actually wanted to be more representative of the Indiana demographics in our leadership as well as on our footprint. We already are, but so we had already had these plans. In terms of 4 buckets of work, we were already working on people strategies. We were already working on supplier diversity strategies. We were already working on customer or patient strategies, and we were already working on community strategies. As our CEO said, just leverage any catalyst, any crisis to make things better. So that's what we've been doing. So we immediately got out in front, very similar. I think Karin's CEO is also on our board of directors. So we had a similar response of wanting to connect to our employees. So one of the things that we did do is we did listening tours with our Black and African American team members, and particularly leaders, very quickly to kind of say, what are you feeling? How are you, what are those insights that we could take into meaningful action? So we accelerated a lot of what I call leveraging people's understanding, and also, again, their superpowers to help improve the culture for everybody. So we were already underway with many of those, and we've just accelerated some of those commitments. So one of those things that we're doing right now is coming back with all that information, and our senior leaders are reviewing it, and then we're gonna come out with some additional commitments and actions. But for me, I always tell people is you can't cram for the test, right? You can't suddenly start doing some diversity and inclusion things if you haven't been building in the foundations for that. And we had been working on that for the past year we were calling it expanding the conversation around diversity and inclusion. So when this came out in terms of racism, almost to a person, I had leaders and team members calling me saying, this is what you were talking about. This is another expansion of that conversation. So we've been adding a lot more conversation in around racism and what is our commitment around racism within healthcare, and how do we help reduce the stress related to racism in healthcare, but also racism as a healthcare issue. So for us, it really accelerated the conversations, it added to it, but it accelerated, similar to what some of the other panelists have already said, it accelerated people's awareness of what it meant to not just be on the sidelines, but to be anti-racist and to have a commitment to equity and inclusion. So for me, it's been exciting because I've got now more people. I always think about the end game. I want more people worrying about the same common issues. And we have 4 values which really are driving that. And one of the values that's driving this for us is compassion. What does compassion look like in the midst of this? And how do you help our team members who are stressed, all team members, by the way, our colleagues, our patients, their families? How do we help deliver the best care designed for them within a societal context that is just shifting on a daily basis, on top of a pandemic, which also caused the same human beings at IU Health to have to shift quickly to deliver with excellence and try to keep people alive. So it's just a lot, but for us, it just accelerated the exact same thing we were already planning to work on anyway.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate that. Karin, will you share with us?
Sure, thank you. So I believe, just to restate the question, how is your company and colleagues supporting employees of color? And what is the most productive way to talk about race in the workplace? I hope I'm not jumping ahead, but for us, we've tried to Lisa's point, keep some simple concepts. And we've been focused on listen, learn, act. So to start from a place of listening, you can demonstrate compassion, you can demonstrate empathy, but most importantly, we have found that we're creating an atmosphere where people are able to just share how they're feeling in a safe space. After the first round of protests that happened in downtown Indy, it's one thing to watch it unfold on television, and it's another to, be in the midst of it. And then it's something else to also walk the streets in the aftermath. And I remember being on the phone with our CEO, Scott, and we were just catching up and really just talking. And he was taking the first step in the three things I just shared. He was just listening. And when I told him that I was about to head downtown, our building had a lot of damage, and our view on property is that property can be replaced, but the people can't be. So he and I went down together. He drove, and it was kind of weird because we're in the midst of COVID, so it's like, I think we can ride together. So we headed downtown together, and we walked around not just our property, but we essentially we covered all of downtown. We walked over to Monument Circle together, and just the path to get to Monument Circle, it was all a bit surreal for me. And I remember sitting down on the steps at Monument Circle, and honestly, just emotionally, I was overcome. And in that moment, there are lots of moments like that for all of us in different ways. He didn't try and find words. He placed his hand on my shoulder. And it was one of the best indications possible for me to know that not only was he with me, he was like right there with me. And what we discussed after that is, our culture is one of, we talk about being relationship based, and the currency in our organization, it's relationships. And we care about you being connected with your colleagues. We care about you paying attention and really checking into those that you work with. It's a OneAmerica family. And for me, I felt like Scott was just an extension of my family in that moment. I've always felt that way, but it was just different in that moment. I think the other thing that impacted me was I am the mother of a Black son. We have a teenager, and I was thinking about the impact of all of this for my son, for my husband, for my brothers, and all of that emotion. Frankly, when Scott and I got back to his house, we got out the iPhone and we recorded a video message that we shared with the entire organization. And it was my ability to be authentic and to share in that moment with my colleagues, all 2,600 of our associates. And we later learned that it kind of got more airtime than that. It's now become a reference for our industry. And it's also been shared with other external boards that both Scott and I are part of. But the more important thing is that my colleagues, every OneAmerica associate, they were open to listening to me. They were open to listening to my concerns as a Black mother. They were concerned enough, they care enough about me to also hear my concerns as a leader in this company and the work that we have to continue to do to create space and to make sure that we are listening to each other. So Scott and I made that video together, and I would tell you that it was a launching pad to really other deeper and more meaningful conversations. We then segued into, we said, you know what, let's start our listening sessions with the whole company. And our first sessions were with all of the Black African-American leaders. And that was, we held several of those to cover all of our leaders. And then we moved to all other leaders after that. And now we're working through sessions with all of our African-American and Black employees or associates first. And then we'll broaden that to be a combination of all of our associates. So these listening sessions are, they're amazing. They are emotionally, you can just feel tapped out. We had 3 in one day, and we said, okay, lesson learned. Let's just do 2 a day. 3 a day is likely too much from just this mental capacity and this ability to really be present and to really sit in and hear and listen and experience the stories that our associates have to share with us. And also recognizing that they feel comfortable that we are creating safe space for those voices to be heard. So I'd say in summary that we're listen, learn, and act. Those are the kind of dimensions that we're traveling along. And I learned something in every single session, and not just from the Black and African-American colleagues. We're learning from everybody, and simple things, as you give examples, and we can talk about some of these later, people are like, I didn't know. So just this notion that we're creating this dialogue and it's safe space, and you don't have to have the right words. In fact, sometimes you don't need any words at all. People just want to know that you are committed to listening, being present, and hearing them. And that's just worth its weight in gold.
That, you know what, I'm like, that applaud. That was so, thank you, Karin. That was very heartfelt.
I'm a sucker for ugly crying, so I'm gonna just go off screen for a minute.
Oh my God, yes. Oh my God. I'm glad you said that, because seriously, I too am a mother of a Black young male who is 17 years old, and he's a hoss, he's a football player. I cried every single day from May 29th until June 10th. It's just so emotional, and our roles as leaders and our lives as human beings and our roles as mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers and family members. And so in every way we're impacted. And like when Karin said 3 times a day, I sighed, because I'm like, I could barely take a full conversation a day in addressing all of the systemic racist policies over the last hundreds of years. And then, just as she indicated, to have people just come alongside and just say, I don't have anything to say, but I just love you. That's so important. Sometimes no words are more powerful than anything you can say. So yeah, Karin, like you, I've cried on so many board meetings, I can't even count, but thank you for being transparent and sharing from that. Pam, I'd like to pitch to you to share with us, has any of this accelerated or changed any efforts and strategies in your company, or not? As Lisa's company, you're already on path, but just share with us, please, what's going on.
Right. I hate to follow. How can I follow that? I'm like needing tissues myself. Yeah. So it is an interesting thing, though, that there are some common themes. You know, Lisa mentioned listening groups, so did Karin. At Delta Faucet, we did the same thing. I cannot imagine doing more than 1 a day. And obviously, being a Caucasian American, I was just listening, right, and engaging. And I hope being the individual to set my hand on a shoulder, right, that connection point. So Lisa mentioned compassion. I mean, both Lisa and Karin mentioned compassion. I think compassion really does start with listening. And one of the common threads as well is that leadership element. So Delta is part of Masco Company, and our CEO, Keith Allman, sent out a note to all the executive leadership that was incredibly empowering for us to not only give us the tools and freedom to say, hey, use the words George Floyd, use the words social injustice. We need to have this conversation. And it shouldn't be something that we don't talk about. He went so far as in our quarterly earnings call last week to begin with statements about racial inequality. It makes me so proud to be part of a company that's having, not just internally having an active conversation, but externally to investors saying, look, this is really a part of what we should be doing here. So that leading from above and empowering, you know, individuals who feel maybe like they don't know what to do. I think we have a lot of the stereotypical, just as many companies do, the, over a certain age, male, Caucasian leaders. And I think with that comes this tension of how do I participate in this? Because listening doesn't feel like enough. And quite frankly, listening isn't enough. It is actively doing things like participating in panels, having conversations in listening groups, and making sure that you say things such as, look, this is a moment in time in the news, but this isn't a single moment in time. This is this needs to be the catalyst to a continuing conversation. So for me, for our multicultural community, all of our diversity and inclusion efforts, for me, my challenge has been, how do we make this a specific 3-year strategy, where at year 2, we create another 3-year strategy, and so on, so that it is a continuing conversation. So all of those elements of, this specific kind of moment in time has acted as a catalyst. I like that word because it really has. But for me, I feel like as a leader, it's my responsibility to make sure it's not just this moment in time that, you spur forward. It is, how do we really continue this conversation? Because there's so much change to be had. And how do we continue and create a 3-year schedule with, again, time for another reiteration of that schedule going forward?
Thank you, Pam. I think something really critically important you said is the continuum. Some people are like, oh, the protests are going to end. Oh, the rioting's going to end. Oh, I had 3 conversations. We're going to be great. Nope, this is a long journey. So I feel like we all need to be invested in decades of work and action, as you all 3 have said. action in order to really address the systemic and historical and injustices and disparities. So I appreciate you saying that and knowing that your company is committed to that. All three of you thus far, Mario, you're next, but indicating how your leadership is leaning in and realizing that this is a long journey that has to be all from every single individual that is a team member for your organization. So thank you for that commitment. Okay, Mario, it's your turn.
Well, you know, and I echo everybody's feelings. These have been incredibly, incredibly sad times. And it's actually reiterated and refocused that the world is inequitable. It's not as equitable as we want it to be. Now, what we've been concentrating on, we've been putting into play an action before this all bubbled to the surface, and it should have bubbled to the surface because inequities are with us. But we've been focusing in on 2 or 3 major things. One of them is internally. We've been focusing for many years now on how do we actually create an equitable environment, in a safe environment inside an organization. So we have, for example, an employee-led equity committee that actually talks to all the employees internally, and we've had it for a long time. We're far from perfect, but we're focusing in on the problem. We've educated our organization on equity and diversity, and especially unconscious bias. We have policies in place right now that guide our organization. We're developing pipelines to create that sort of equitable platform where people could ascend through the organization, through education and through focus. And we are also polishing up our hiring practices, or how we actually do hiring. Basically setting things on, for lack of a better term, shortlisting on the basis of a certain platform or a certain amount of qualifications, and then hiring for fit in the organization. So we're doing all of that. We also externally, we've gone from a spend level, an XBE, MWB, DBE, all the minority gambit, federal and local, from 20% to 35%. So all our external spend is at the highest level it's ever been, and 35% equates to about $50 million a year of outside spend with minorities. So we've actually been putting action into place. That's part of the focus we have. And another focus we have is that we have and not just me, we have an incredible group that makes sure that the organization stays on focus, because with everything, with inequality, in some cases it becomes unconscious. So we've got to make sure we have a conscience to the organization, and that conscience is called Holly Harrington. And she makes sure that everybody understands that you've got to focus on that each and every day, because if we don't focus on that each and every day, it just goes into the background and people lose sight of it. So it's incredibly important that we have a diversity officer internally as dedicated as a Holly Harrington or her group to make sure that we stay on point.
Thank you, Mario. That was awesome. I appreciate it. You guys, thank you so much for that. Okay, so I have a couple of questions. So I'll ask this one. We've been talking about how you've been working with your leadership and your teams in these times of better understanding. Pam and Karin, you'd all kind of indicated, people saying, I don't know. So one of the questions was, have you used the book, White Fragility, to have your leadership read, or your entire organization, or any such? And if not, has there been another book that you have recommended for your leadership team or your organization? So Karin, please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Angela. We've not recommended, or we're not doing kind of book club assignments, if you will. What we've really tried to encourage is, your journey needs to be your journey. And rather than dictating to people what they should go read, or giving a list of, what might be right for me, it might strike you completely the wrong way, right? So we've just tried to point our associates to resources and allow them to assess kind of where they are on their own journey, and empower them, of course, to make those selection decisions on their own. I have heard of other organizations using different books to engage. I'm actually a part of some other book clubs that are selecting different books for purposes of engaging and having a dialogue and learning more, right? But we've really tried to just anchor on this notion of listening and meeting people where they are. And I'll share one example of where it ended up being a lesson learned for many of us in this particular session. One of our white leaders, basically, he said to me, he says, Karin, recognizing this is safe space, I'm not sure what to call you. And I said, well, I'm Karin, you can just start with that. Now, it's a lighthearted moment. What he was referring to was whether he should call me African American or Black. And that led into really a dialogue about they're not the same and people don't identify in the same way. So it turned into really a session about just awareness. Another example that we talked about, in this category of being systemic racism, someone gave an example of when you go to a drugstore, grocery store, and if you have to ask someone to open a cabinet for you so that you can appropriately purchase your hair products if you have ethnic hair. And for all of my white colleagues, they were just completely moved that would even have to occur. Now, I will say that recently I've been in CVS and Walmart. They got everything on lockdown. Deodorant, soap, toilet paper. So perhaps everybody will get a sense of what it feels like to have to go ask for permission to make a purchase. So we've not been prescriptive on books, Angela. We've just really tried to, again, promote meaningful conversations and have people, feel moved to go do their own research. Now, there are other organizations like, I think, United Way, the CICP. They've all been providing kind of these great resources and links. And of course, we make things like that available, but we've not been prescriptive. We are starting our process around the unconscious bias training for the entire organization. Our leadership team has been through that once before, and we're going to go through it again. Again, we have some new team members, so we think it's important that we stay on this journey together. And part of that assessment, it's an individual assessment. And back to this, knowing where you are in your own journey, that will be a prerequisite for every employee. Every one of our associates will have to complete that assessment before they are able to complete the unconscious bias training. You have to know where you are on your journey before you can really, we believe, be impactful in other ways.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karin. Pam, are you recommending any specific books or resources? Oh, and to add to Karin, also CICF. You indicated CICP, United Way, and CICF are all great organizations that have great resources. So Pam, please.
Yeah, very similar to Karin. We don't have anything kind of specifically prescriptive, but I do have my own kind of personal recommendation, and selfishly, I use this book fairly frequently because I'm fairly analytically driven, and I like to, I find that the most compelling way to bring someone into a conversation is maybe to make it about something that they might be more comfortable with, and then step them to a place where there is a little discomfort and we're really making some progress, and that's with business analytics. So How to Be an Anti-Racist is an incredible book. It is very thick with data and information and those shocking statistics. Karin mentioned that, certain white friends might think, oh my gosh, your hair products are behind closed cabinets. Well, yes, they are. And how have we not noticed that before, right? It's an eye-opening experience. And this book to me is incredibly just, again, thick with not only just really compelling analytics, but the story that I told in another kind of speaker series was surrounding the starting line of a race. One of the analogies that's used there is you suddenly pull an individual who's been a spectator potentially and not trained, and you throw them against what would be considered, individuals who've been training their whole life, who have different resources, different assets, and then expect them to run at the same pace. It takes the conversation about racial equality and really reframes it in a way that's not threatening. And then all of a sudden people can say, oh, yeah, that's really not fair. I hadn't thought about it in that fashion before. So for me, definitely that book is incredible, and it's got great analogies that can open the conversation in a non-threatening way to say, hey, first of all, start to notice, start to make sure that your eyes are open. And even, if you're in Walmart, take a look at what's locked up and what's not. And what does that mean? And maybe ask the question, have the conversation at your own dinner table of, to your child, did you notice this? What does that mean to you? Because it means something to me, and I feel like we should talk about it.
Thank you for that, Pam. That was very insightful. I appreciate that. Lisa, you're next.
So let me remind me just to make sure the question. So this was about the books or any kind of that?
Yes.
I'm I think we're very similar. I think the challenge on diversity and inclusion is either you buy into differences or you don't. Diversity and inclusion is about differences. So it's also about how people are experiencing the same situation differently. So at IU Health, we have over 17, hospitals or regions or locations. We have physicians' offices. We have 35,000 people across the whole state experiencing this context in a different way. So similar to what Karin said, and also Pam and others, we did not mandate anything. What happened though was that energy within, I would say, just so you know, I've been dealing with this or addressing it this time since May 5th when Drezon Reed was killed. Drezon was a mentee of one of my team members. So we were dealing with that. And then, I had a lot of leaders saying, how do I talk about it? How do I think about it? With the acceleration of the conversation with Mr. Floyd's death, it led to a lot of people pinging me and my organization, my department, saying, what do I do? How do I do it? For some people, the book club. So many people chose the white fragility. They chose how to be an anti-racist. But collectively, I had a number of white leaders and team members saying, how do I show up differently? So we actually created two companion pieces. One of the pieces was white allyship. And it used some of those principles from white fragility and a variety of books to say, here's some top 10 things you can do. And we married that up with our 4 values. What does excellence look like? And to your point, Pam, I'm an analytics junkie. So, leveraging data, but if you have a natural rhythm of leveraging data on something else, how do you leverage data in this situation as well? But simultaneous to that, Angela, we had our minority employees saying, where are my top 10 things? What do I do? Because for a long time, people have been not talking about it. And suddenly their leaders were pulling them up and saying, tell us how you're feeling. So we had a lot of our people of color saying, help me explain, because I'm in tears. I'm in tears and my throat is hurting. I can't tell you what it's like. And we had some team members. I agree with Karin. I have a tissue everywhere I go because we had a family. We have 2 Black men here that are brothers, and we're describing calling each other up every night to make sure they got home alive. I'm gonna start crying. That's what happens during wartime, not in where we are today. And so to have people like that are your team members describing this added way of having to deal with just being who you are and showing up. When Indianapolis shut down and did the curfew, right? We had some of our team members that were told you just use your badge. Some of our Black team members were not allowed through the curfews. They had to prove that they were also our employees again. Some of our white team members did not have to do that. So it's even on those little aspects that you think you're protecting your citizens, and then you're actually creating a barrier for your citizens that are Black. So for us, it was really, what do they need? And some of them needed those companion pieces. Some of them said, as they used that as a jumping off point, then that led to book clubs. we have culture councils around the organization, and we have diversity councils, affinity groups. So those groups were being pulled on, and they said, we want to talk about it this way. So very similar to what Karin did, we were just, I call it agile. We were hacking what we were doing. We were just like, what do you need? When people started saying, people are making awful or saying awful things on social media. We had a social media policy, but then what does that look like versus freedom of speech, right? And how do you allow people the ability to say what they want, but then not do it on behalf of your organization? So we created even a decision tree on how to help people decide, you know, what compassion looked like in those kinds of situations versus others. So I always tell everybody that this kind of space, it's messy and beautiful and challenging. And we're just trying to meet people where they are, but help them. I call it this metaphor I use a lot is you need to be on the same freeway, going in the same direction, even if you're not in the same lane. So that's what we were trying to do. And we are still doing that. And it's really our team members that are guiding us and leading us through different strategies and through different ideas. And we've got it like a recipe. We're piloting different things around the organization. And I'll close out with this comment. One of the challenges for us also is, for example, Frankfurt, Indiana has about 30% of that population is Latino or Hispanic, and they don't all speak English as a first language. So when we thought about COVID-19, but when we also thought about the safety of what was going on with this pandemic on racism, it's how do you protect and take care of also people that don't speak English as a first language, right? We have a huge Burmese population in Indiana. So thinking about those kinds of things and then adapting your rhythm and quickly adapting your rhythm or hacking your rhythm to be supportive to a variety of people quickly and in different ways, I think is really what we were trying to do. And so it's going to be very different depending on where you start from and where you're trying to go.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate you sharing those stories of insight to help maybe somebody is in the conference today that doesn't know, and you just gave them a primary example of this is what life is like. So thank you for that. Mario, are you using any books, or how are you kind of informing your leadership team?
We're using training. We're being intentional, and I echo everybody's focus. This isn't a technical problem. This is a human problem. And it has a lot to do with our life experiences, tacit knowledge. And for some of us, all of us that have tacit knowledge, you know more than you could say. So our experiences can't be fully reflected in a book. It just cannot. But we could do it through intentionality, and we are doing it through intentionality. We're doing it through the training of unconscious bias, although you're never going to get the life experiences I have or you all have. We could help our colleagues to understand how our life experiences look. We're using a book called Network Beyond Bias, just as a tool. It's just basically one of the tools that we use. But the strongest tool that we have is our own life experiences. And like I said before, we have our incredible corporate conscience, which is called Holly Harrington. And that's our main focus, to be our conscience and to be the conscience of everybody. Because, you know, since most people don't have our collective life experiences, they don't see it through us. They don't see the struggle that we went through. You know, I worked in an industry that was incredibly biased, the aviation industry, that was incredibly misogynist. So anytime you saw a minority or a woman in a certain position, that minority or woman was 2 to 3 times as good as their white male counterpart. That was the fact. In order to get to that position, you had to be that good. So my life experiences are a little bit different to most, but so are all of our life experiences. And getting that sort of story out there helps our colleagues to do the right thing. And that's the only thing we're trying to do. We're just trying to get everybody to do the right thing and be equitable and look at everybody through the same lens, which is incredibly difficult because we haven't gotten there yet. Our society really hasn't gotten there yet. But with everybody focusing and pulling in the same direction, we get better and better each day. And it has been getting better. These tragic events have been incredibly tragic and heartbreaking, but they were always under the surface. And it's good that it comes out because it gives us more focus and more ability to be intentional in making forward motion. So the end of the story is a book is just a tool. Use whatever tool you want. There isn't one magic tool. And I think if people could actually, for lack of a better term, walk in our shoes for a little bit, they could understand a little bit better. But that's more difficult to do than just printing it on a piece of paper.
Yeah, and it's so hard to jump in on these Zoom meetings. I'm sorry, Angela, but Mario, what you said to me just resonates so much, because one of the key elements, I think, of really getting to listening and understanding compassion is that one story doesn't diminish another story. That someone's experience and knowing that if you are a minority at the table at a high level, you have had to work twice as hard. That doesn't diminish my story or the person next to me's story. It just is their own work and their own story. And if we could all just sit and embrace and say, yeah, that is fact, that doesn't diminish anything about me, anything about anybody else at the table. It just absolutely is. I love that you said that. Sorry to jump in, Angela.
No, that's perfect. I appreciate you highlighting that because it's true. I appreciate that. So actually, Pam and Mario, a couple of the questions in the Q&A, if you can, Pam, restate the name of the book and the author that you were referring, and then Mario, if you can show up or say the title and the author of your book, please.
Yes, so mine is How to Be an Anti-Racist, and I'm pulling up the author right now. I apologize. It is by Ibram Kendi, and the last name spelled Kendi.
Okay, mine is Network Beyond Bias for those who can't read backward on the screen, and by Amy C. Waninger. So, and for those who can read backwards, here it is.
Thank you. That's not even dyslexia. I don't know what that is, but that is a superpower if you can read backwards. So I'm kind of melding a couple of the questions from the Q&A together, but if you can each take an opportunity, please, to share with us a couple of questions. One, what the percentage breakdown of leadership diversity is. So women of color, people of color, et cetera. And then kind of share how you hold your different divisions and departments accountable for maintaining any of your diversity goals and efforts. So Pam, I'll start with you on that. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so across Delta Faucet, so all of our locations in the US, we monitor by gender and cultural diversity. So today we're at 37%, sorry, that's an important one, 37% on the gender diverse, and only 13 on cultural diversity. Obviously, we've got lots of work going on there. I think it's worth noting too that first of all, these have been improving every year, which is the right trajectory and the way it needs to go. How we hold individuals accountable is really, again, through metrics to look at the individual discipline. So for example, from segmentation perspective, I might be over the retail segment, but we also have trade and e-commerce and operations and information technology and so on, to really identify, hey, you know, what's happening in certain areas where maybe diversity isn't showing up, not as an indictment, but where do we need to specifically take some action, and then creating plans against that. We went through that activity actually at the end of last year, just as I was coming in, and one great outcome that we found and that we're really actively moving forward in is in recruiting. Quite frankly, we participate in Hispanic Today, Campus Pride. We've gone out to various diverse sourcing partners, because for us, having not only a diverse interview panel, but obviously, you know, getting people to the plate and consciously recruiting from the HBCUs, so Howard University, and actively going out and making sure that we are recruiting to the best candidates, and not only just the best candidates, but, you know, a diverse pool of candidates where we've got people at bat that can do that.
Thank you, Pam. Lisa, would you like to share with us what some of your diversity numbers are and how you hold the other teammates accountable?
Yeah, so a couple things. I always talk about when you're talking numbers, it's always versus what. So we are measuring ourselves versus the marketplace. Okay, our marketplace is the state of Indiana. That's different than my previous employer, which is Cardinal Health, and my marketplace was 60 countries across the globe, right? So it gets very challenging. So versus the state of Indiana, our footprint, we are actually at, hold on a second, we are 81% white, and we are 19% ethnically different. The state of Indiana is actually 80% white and 20% ethnically different. So we actually mirror the population already. Our leadership is not. Our leadership is not as diverse. So that's, again, a different strategy, right? It's not necessarily a recruiting strategy. It's a promotion up and a development up strategy. So we're working, which would be, for those of you that don't know on the audience, it's talent management kinds of strategies, right? How do you help people develop? So we're working on that. Gender-wise, so when people say, are you worried about gender? I'm kind of not, okay? Our total gender footprint at IU Health is 78% female. So we are 78% female. Our leadership is 67% female, manager and above. So again, this is where diversity is interesting, right? If our nursing population, it is rare to have men there. So when you talk about a diversity strategy, not only are we going after people of color, but we're going after men too, because you want more men and you want that balance. So again, it's that, you know, where do you start from and where are you going, right? So we're doing that. Interestingly enough, when we start looking at, we are now 41% millennial too. And we are 4% Gen Z. And for those of you that don't know, Gen Z is about 18 years old right now. What's going to be interesting with Gen Z is they're also identifying about 20 to 28% of them are identifying as sexually fluid and gender fluid. So we are also really working towards that, making sure that our culture is open to people of all backgrounds, and that intersectionality by the year 2045, 2050, the data is showing in the US that we're going to be mostly biracial or two or more races, right? So what does that mean in that intersection? So we're trending towards that. A big thing when people talk about recruiting, we actually have a bigger challenge around retention. And some of that retention is tied to culture. One of the things I wanted to hit on was one of the biggest surprises for me in healthcare was really how many of our team members are dealing with racist patients, racist families, sexist patients, sexist families. And that plays out on culture and how our folks can go in safely. So the more diverse populations you have, and how do you send them in safely, for example, to people's home for do home care when people don't want them there, right? So thinking about that and those extra elements of stress, I think, on what does that mean? So we actually have some challenges, not only in the recruiting and the sourcing, Pam, doing that differently, but it's really about the retention and how do we create such a great experience that our folks stick, and then helping them to develop up.
Thank you. I'm glad you made that differentiation for us as far as like you're measuring against whom, the state, and really also delineating between Gen Z and Gen X, millennials, because they start to blur. We all know what a baby boomer is. After that, we start to get confused. So thank you for clarifying that for the audience. I appreciate that. Mario.
Well, I'm very proud to report that at the senior executive level, 50% of our executives are female.
That's awesome.
And 25% are minority. So we've made a lot of forward movement on this, and we've been very intentional. And where we're being very intentional is creating that sort of pipeline, because we have deep connections right now and board members on the Urban League, the Indiana Latino Institute, GAR, and different organizations that could help us create that sort of pipeline into the organization, into a career field that most people won't even know about. So that we're creating that sort of like connection to this career field where we could bring in more diversity and be more inclusive in our community and create really what we want to create, which is a diverse organization.
Thank you, Mario. Karin.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. I'll start with our board because this notion that it does start at the top is a really important point. And we've had 6 additions, the last 6 additions to our board. Half have been people of color and half are women. So we are definitely proud of that. And so 33% women and 17% people of color. In terms of our executive leadership team, which we all report to the CEO of the company, in 2014, brace yourself now, it was 100% white men, 2014. We're proud to say that today it's 33% female and 17% people of color. So I'm a twofer, just so you know. Woman and Black. So companies celebrate twofers if you didn't know that. So pretty stoked about that. Now we have another group, it's kind of the direct reports to our leadership team. In 2014, that group was comprised of only about 20% females and 2.8% people of color. When you know better, you do better. We reorganized that group. We went through an extensive reorganization. We did that top to bottom, and we recognized that we needed to do some things differently. So while our succession planning and our talent development programs are continuing to grow every year, we did have examples in areas where we had succession plans. We had pipeline development where we had been intentional in trying to identify people of color and gender diversity as well. We wanted to make sure that when we reorganized that Scott has this analogy that you have to fish in different ponds to catch different fish. So we had to look differently at our own internal talent as well. So this next leadership population, we've now moved to 31% female and 15% people of color. So again, we're continuing to make progress. The other thing that we learned, and I say learn because the lesson for us in the midst of all of this, we've been pretty humble. We've had a lot of humility when we talk about diversity and inclusion. We're a humble organization. And what we learned through this process, our associates have told us repeatedly, we have a great story to tell. You all should speak up more and equip us with some of these success stories so that we can also be part of helping tell our OneAmerica story. Our company has grown rapidly. Our associate base has grown 60% over, I'd say, the last 5 years. And in that group, we have, like other organizations, women make up the majority of the organization, but women are not advancing in the leadership ranks at the same rate of men. So we recognize that, and that's an area that we need to focus on. Now, we've gotten some feedback that, I don't think men have mastered having babies yet. Women still have to do that. So we find that sometimes women do not want to return to the workplace after they've had their children. We're also seeing more examples of families, whether you're a male or female, you may be partners and you're adopting children. From all of this, what we've learned is the need to be flexible in terms of some of how people return to work. We've had to modify our parental leave policies to make room for that. And even if moms or dads have decided to leave the workplace for a period of time, we've learned that it's valuable to stay in touch because things change, life circumstances change, and we've been more mindful of those things, again, as we continue to mature in our own process and journey. I would also say that as we talk with our leaders about their expectations, our expectations of them as leaders, if they are sourcing for a role, if they have a vacancy on their team, we have a process that causes them to say, do I need to think about this role differently? Do I need the same type of experience? Or we get caught up in this notion that you have to have institutional knowledge for everything. And I would say that I'm a test case of that's not true. I've never worked in the financial services industry, but all those moves I described earlier, all those different companies and different experiences, those skills are transferable. And we're trying to teach our leaders on how they need to hire or interview more for potential. And I think, Mario, you mentioned fit for the organization. If someone can, if they've got the right DNA in terms of that desire and willingness to learn, they're open to being trained. You don't have to check the box on every possible thing there is for qualification purposes. Now you have to be competent. Now there's some things that I think my colleagues would tell me, Karin, you need some special skills if you're going to be in actuarial science. You need some specific skills on that. But we have customer service jobs. Those are not unique to our industry. If you have a propensity to serve and you care about connecting with people, you can be trained. So we just have to open our thinking, and we're going to continue, I think, to see improvements in our numbers. We don't have quotas. Some organizations have elected that. Some call them goals. I think you have to really pay attention to what works for your organization. And for us, we've been able to make meaningful progress because we have a CEO leading from the top. And again, back to process, you have to build in those steps. And I'm sure Holly would agree with this, Mario, if she were on. For every vacant position, we're asking our leaders, do you have a diverse slate? And in some instances, I'm telling you that we struggle to find a diverse slate. There are not a lot of people of color that are actuaries. They're just not. But what we're also learning is we have to start as a company, and we're doing this, the community partnerships that we have to start educating early with kids what the careers are in financial services. Many kids, and I'll tell you, I'm an example of this. My family never talked about having insurance when I was growing up. I don't know about any of you. My grandmother had insurance, but that guy came by every week and she paid him 25 or 26 bucks and she did an insurance policy on everybody. Well, financial security and closing the wealth gap in this country, a lot of that hinges on people having stronger financial literacy and being more aware. And this industry, this job, this company has unlocked so much of that for me from an educational purpose. And we have to get in these schools, in these community centers. We continue to partner with our community partners and educate on what OneAmerica represents. And we're trying to model that. We have a program, Angela, called the Pathways Program, where we target a specific zip code. We're trying to find kids to introduce them to what careers at OneAmerica could look like. And we have kids that when they go through these experiences, they come out of these experiences saying, I thought y'all were a bank. I didn't even know what you're just a big old building, thought you were a bank. And we're building bridges and these kids are connected. That's that pipeline work. So, we think about pipeline work maybe for college and beyond. We're talking about pipeline work at the elementary school level, at the junior high level, at the high school level, so that as kids are making choices about math and science and what they want to be when they grow up, we want them thinking about a career with OneAmerica. We have a fraud department. We have an accounting department. We have an audit department. So some of those things that might seem nebulous, we want them to know who OneAmerica is. And all those things that I just shared, we believe are going to continue to have a direct impact on improving our numbers over time.
I'm just going to add preach, because I think K through 8 is critical for helping people to dream and to dream big career dreams. So
absolutely, Lisa, completely agree. We have a partnership with Junior Achievement, and from time to time we get these photos from school principals, and of course this isn't happening in the era of COVID, but before that they send over pictures with kids with a suit jacket on standing in front of the replica of our OneAmerica tower. And you got these kids dreaming. They want to be the next CEO. They want to be the next CFO. And honestly, when little girls that look like me ask about what my path has been, when you talk about impact, Oh my God. You don't really fully appreciate, at least I'm learning more and more every day, the impact of my role and my ability to influence others. It's just, I'm grateful.
We have to change family histories, just like ours was, ours, all of us on this panel have been changed. So preach. My Mac, I can do this.
No, I'm with you, Lisa. I'm over here going, preach, preach. And I'm so glad you said, both Karin and Lisa, just the dialogue you two have had together, the power of influence in K-8, people overlook that. And that's why there are some spaces where there aren't Blacks, African Americans, Hispanics, and Latinos, because nobody told us when we were little that we could do it. In fact, we heard the opposite. We're all blessed. We had people sharing and showing us that we could do it, but too often a lot of children in our spaces didn't hear that. And that goes back to multiple policies, different systemic racist policies that push down into saying like, no, you cannot do that. You cannot be the next CEO. You can't be a Black or brown CEO woman. Well, yeah, we can, but people told us that we couldn't. And so I'm really thankful you said that. You actually kind of also kind of teed up another question. One thing that I always say when I go out talking to circles and leaders, et cetera, is exactly what you said, Karin. If you take the time to go into the K-8 system and show these children that there are opportunities in your company and your industry and different sectors and industries, and you show them, you know, you smell good, you look cute and pretty and handsome and all that stuff, that's where they get sparked and inspired. They absolutely have superpowers. Lisa, I am absolutely adopting that. They all have superpowers, but nobody is igniting that superpower. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's so important for us to do that, and also utilizing different tools and determining who's qualified. Like, people like to check boxes, 10 years of experience in senior leadership in a Fortune 500 company. Well, by default, you're excluding women, Blacks, Latinos, and Hispanics. So you just said, we want a white male for this job. So you can't do that. You have to be more creative. So I'm thankful that you indicated that. So talking about pouring into our youth, kind of share with me, and you guys really hit on a lot of things, community benefits and developing subs into primes. Either one of those or both, I feel like we're down to like 5 minutes, but kind of share what you're doing community benefit wise, pouring into K-12 or K-8, and or developing subs from subs to primes. And Karin, you're off right now. So if you would go ahead and start, that would be great.
I'm off. What'd you say?
You're able to talk, like you weren't muted.
She really does know me. She knows I'm a little good. So I think what I'd like to highlight on this point is the importance of making sure that the learning happens in both directions. And what do I mean by that? With our pathway students, they were grouped with mentors. One mentor in kind of the area that they were assigned to work, if you will, so like a functional mentor, and then another mentor that maybe has a similar interest or life experience. So let's say that I enjoy photography. Well, I might be grouped with one of the pathway students that enjoys photography. The way that we've managed this is that most of these kids are from low-income communities. And their household situations, they come from single parent homes or dual parent homes. So that's not a determining factor for how they're selected, but it's really more in terms of what we learned is that in order for these barriers to come down and for these students to feel like they can learn this notion that I mentioned earlier about listening, learn, and then act, it applies also with our pathway students. And when we have students that can identify with what it means to go to school and not have lunch money, and you can have a conversation about that because you've been there, or if you come from a situation where there are 7 other kids in the household and you're not quite sure if you're going to get to have dinner that night, but we want you to focus on a job and come prepared to contribute. If you're not sure, this is before COVID, how to get transportation from where you live to our office tower. And if we didn't help you solve for that, what we learned is that the students weren't really able to bring their complete authentic selves because of their personal circumstance. So this notion of having mentors be engaged so that they can intercept or they can try to identify how do you address these barriers and take them off the table, so that when these summer interns, when these students come to us, that they're able to show up and give us everything that they have in terms of they're not worried about lunch money. They're not worried about transportation to the office because we've neutralized all of that. So for me, I think what I have just really loved about the approach that our community affairs team takes, which is led by Jen Pittman and Maddie Howe and Denise, they lead this program I'm talking about, Pathways, and they are amazing. But they're practical. They try to approach this from a problem-solving perspective, knowing that if you can't deal with my kind of everyday basic needs, you are not going to get the best of what I have to offer. So again, that's not just a focus for our Pathways students. We're trying to show up in that same way for every associate that we have, and connecting those community needs with our associate needs and then with the customer needs. It all has to come together. And we're putting our associates at the center of that. So that'd be the one big lesson, Angela, I've learned, I'd say in the last year, is that you can't ignore the community components of this, because if the community is in pain, that has a way of showing up in the work environment.
Thank you, Karin, very much. I appreciate that. And you're right, wraparound services and identifying those needs are key. Mario, perhaps you can kind of address, I know you guys do a lot of, speaking of Holly, you're Queen Holly, maybe you can share a little bit of insight into how you develop subs into primes or something along those lines, please.
All right. Like I said before, the main focus is to be intentional. And the main thing that we're doing is making sure that we do that and we keep that top of mind each and every day. Externally, we have this incredibly strong program to bring subs in and connect subs to prime and actually break up the work to such a degree that subs could actually do it. So that's why we go from 20% 4 years ago to 35% just last year. We have outreaches. We make sure we keep in contact with minority subs. You know, we do everything. We go above and beyond, and we have a team to do this. We have a dedicated team. It's not an afterthought. It is a focus of our organization and one of the strategic focuses of our organization. Now, internally, we're doing the same thing. It's, you know, it's more of an evolution than a revolution. It takes time to change because people have to leave the organization and we have to bring people into the organization and level out the playing field. We have the ACE Academy that we liaison with, and the ACE Academy is aviation career education. And it basically shows kids from K through 12 what we do, which is, it's varied. You could have everything from a technical job all the way up to a professional jobs. We have attorneys, we have engineers. I'm an engineer myself. Holly's an engineer. We have engineers, you know, we have technicians. We have a gambit of career fields in the aviation industry. We also liaison very strongly with the Indiana Latino Institute leadership program that we bring people in. Something to keep in mind is that, you know, we kind of, the proof is in the pudding. We hired 4 interns recently. All 4 interns are minorities. And these are the leaders of the organization going forward, creating that sort of pipeline. And part of the pipeline is also creating the conditions by which people that come in here, next leaders come in here that don't have the wherewithal financially, can be able to educate themselves if they have the drive. So we're putting policies in place that will pay for education for folks that come in here. No strings attached. To create that sort of pipeline going forward, it'll take years, but we've started, and we started many, many years ago to create that sort of pipeline. And this is the future of the Indianapolis Airport Authority.
Thank
That's
you,
awesome,
Mario.
Mario.
I know, right? That's phenomenal. Thank you. I know. Applause, everyone. Well done, Team International Airport. Pam, would you like to share either or? I can restate the question. Are you okay?
Oh, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah. I can't compete with Mario. I mean, those numbers are amazing. I aspire to bring us there. You know, our biggest engagement, I'll start on the kind of the youth engagement. We partner with Girls Inc. And, you know, Karin, some of the things that you said really resonate. And it's an interesting common thread amongst all of us on the panel here, starting in very humble beginnings. You know, I remember the moment when I realized that I could be something other than a hairdresser, which, by the way, I would be a horrible hairdresser. So, just putting that out there. But, you know, having that exposure and coming in at a very young age and having a dialogue and creating a safe space, you know, it's interesting. The questions that I like to start with some of these younger girls are not even about career. It's about, you know, what the next step looks like and what is the catalyst. I'll use that word again to get there, and changing the conversation about education and how education is really absolutely just a foundation. And education doesn't necessarily mean traditional education. You know, certainly, you know, talking about college, talking about technical schools, talking about those types of things, incredibly important. But it's how do you educate yourself around what else is out there? And the story I always tell is I remember when I was, you know, third grade, let's say, when I was a kid, thinking that you were really rich, I'm kind of air quoting rich, if you had a washer and dryer and an attached garage. Like, that was the definition for me. I was like, holy cow, you've made it if you have a washer and dryer in your house and an attached garage. And now, you know, understanding that that's a whole progression of education. You know, it's not, oh, well, wait a minute, you know, that shouldn't be my goal necessarily. Not that that's a bad goal, but that's maybe the first step toward a number of other things. And it's not necessarily about the tangible things that you buy, but it's about, you know, whole home health and not worrying about whether you're going to, you know, have lunch money the next day. So for me, that was a long way around. Girls Inc. is a great partnership. And I think role playing as well does a couple of things. It brings in compassion and understanding, and also creates an environment for really putting yourself in someone else's shoes that might not look like your shoes. So, you know, having a young child look at a Karin and say, holy cow, that I could be her. And she looks like me. And that's amazing. And having that exposure. So Girls Inc. is a great organization as well, especially here in Indianapolis.
And Pam, I guess for me, like, I would want my daughter standing on this corner looking at this panel and taking something away from all of us, kind of back to our other point that we all have such unique experiences, and I just believe there's something to be learned from all of us. And Pam, I was listening, you talk about the washer and dryer. Part of my chores growing up was actually doing the laundry and hanging it on the clothing line, and folding clothes, and I was responsible. That was one of my chores. So even today, doing the laundry is very therapeutic for me.
That's awesome.
So,
Go ahead, Lisa, please.
I didn't know. So for us, community benefit, I'm going to hit that because that's part of our commitment to the state of Indiana. But my favorite word is steward. We have a lot of people stewarding that, and I call it the ecosystem of care. So our chaplaincy, for example, is doing something that is so innovative, or maybe not innovative to everybody here, but it's about how do you help people get care. So for example, if there's, you know, single people or older couples, for example, that need to go into the hospital or need to take care of their pets at home, he's really working with congregational partnerships and chaplaincies around the state of Indiana to help people get to where they need to go. I know some of us joined together some other health systems. We bought a van so people could get to their primary care, which, you know, versus instead of going to emergency departments, that was pretty special. So I always think about, we have a lot of people stewarding it. We have our IU Health Foundation, we have our community outreach, we have our supplier diversity folks, we have population health, really thinking about how do we get the tests. Think about Indiana Black Expo as being one of those awesome partners. How do you get COVID-19 tests to people? I'm thinking about how do you build in diverse voices into vaccine development, right? Because many of our cultures and our populations, we don't trust that stuff, right? We don't trust that. So, but then if we're not part of that testing, like women, a lot of the medications for heart disease are not as effective for women because a lot of women weren't built into that testing. So how do we do that? So I think we have a lot of people at IU Health. I think that's our sweet spot. That is our passion. But I'll close out with this one little story on COVID-19. I was really worried as people were getting ill, but one of the challenges was in many of our cultures, you want to connect to your family, but how do you do that when you're really ill? And one of the things I kept thinking about was how do you do death and dying in the midst of a pandemic? And it was really some congregational partnerships in the state of Indiana that came together and thought about, again, how do you sit Shiva? How do you sit Shiva when you're supposed to do it a certain way? How do you integrate your faith beliefs in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a virus situation in a hospital? And it was really those community partnerships and those community superpowers, right? The organizations that have a different superpower that really helped us and helped our social workers and others think about how do you help people and give them love in the middle of one of the hardest times in their lives and doing it differently. So I don't know how to do this work. Honestly, I don't think anybody in our system knows how to do it without this ecosystem of care and caring about each other. And I think that's really what this panelist is also describing, is how do we help each other? We couldn't do it without insurances, that Karin's leading. We couldn't do it without the flights and the ability to move and to get where they need to go, which Mario leads. Pam, every one of us, there's no way to wash your hands without water. There's no way without a Delta faucet, right? So at the end of the day, it's those connections, and you can't do any of this without a system of government and those connections. So for us, I don't know how to do it without it. So it's for us, it's that ecosystem of care that really kind of drives our overall delivery of service and products and service.
I think part of what we're all describing is this notion of identifying barriers and figuring out how to get after it. The healthcare disparities, Lisa, I worked in healthcare for about 4 years, and there was a lot of attention paid to how do you educate minority communities on, the right choices and awareness and
for prevention, right?
Yes, and so much. But then that leads to, do they have access? So it's one thing after another, right? So
yeah, like diabetes, if you tell them to eat healthy, but then they have a food desert, right? How do you get to that? See, and that's
exactly
working with other organizational systems that can help doing that. I found out Urban League, for example, became one of the places to deliver, food in the middle of COVID-19 and partnering with Gleaners and partnering with others, right? I think there's, again, to your point, Karin, I think the more complex the problem, the more differences and different brains you need to help solve it. And you can't do it by yourself, no matter what organization we are.
Well, and connecting us. Mario, there are times that Holly will reach out to me, and I've done the same, to say, hey, we've got this candidate. It's opportunistic. We don't really have a particular role, but can you talk to so-and-so, and maybe through your network, we can get someone connected. So it is the power of these networks and the people that you're able to connect to that can create opportunities where they otherwise wouldn't exist. And that's a lot of what we're talking about today.
Absolutely. It is all about relationships. And thank you, Lisa, for continuing to bring in the broader perspective of diversity, religious diversity, sexual orientation diversity, all of that. So I appreciate you specifically saying that as you were talking and making sure our conversation was extremely robust and very inclusive. So thank you. I'm looking at Alice. I don't know what our cutoff time is because, of course, this panel, we could probably all go for another hour, but I want to be cognizant of time. So I figure if we're running out, then Alice or the master puppeter of the IT system will just like shut us down. So meanwhile, I'll continue to go. But thank you all for sharing. I'm glad you all had different perspectives on what you're doing. To Mario, that developing subs into primes is critical and kind of really dovetails in nicely with the disparity study work and helps some of our attendees. And then everything that you all are doing differently to really engage with the community and identify that diverse talent. Yes, okay, Alice just said, please wrap up. I was like, I kind of feel like we're at the end of time here. So I really am so extremely humbled and thankful to have had this opportunity to be your moderator. You all are phenomenal leaders, and I'm so thrilled that this audience was able to get benefit and be blessed by your experiences, your challenges, your overcoming. I think to wrap it up, some of the key points that you all really indicated was listening and taking action, realizing that this is a long journey and that we just have to be intentional in all of our roles to really move this ball forward, and being authentically yourself, crying, laughing, hugging, being silent, and talking are all very valuable for all of us. So thank you, Lisa, Pam, Karin, and Mario. Thank you, Alice and IBE, for having us. I'm humbled and honored to join. And with that, I will bid the audience adieu. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And Alice, I'm assuming that you all will disconnect us electronically as needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angela.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Angela. It's been an honor.